Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, smokestacks have been a conspicuous part of the man-made landscape. These objects, which are also referred to as chimneys or flues, are responsible for venting harmful pollutants into the atmosphere, thereby reducing their concentration to acceptable levels. This function often requires smokestacks to be exceptionally large, and it is not uncommon for stacks connected to large manufacturing or energy production operations to rise above 300 meters in height. It is this physical prominence that makes them a natural symbol for the industrial landscape that they have come to dominate. In modern society, the aforementioned symbolic value of smokestacks is almost entirely negative. If and when they are brought up, it is more often than not in the context of dirt and pollution. However, before the late 20th century, the exact opposite was the case. Smokestacks were often seen as positive symbols of industrial might and economic prosperity. Far from the ominous figures we think of today, smokestacks were very much an accepted part of contemporary culture. In this presentation, we will make use of period and contemporary media to explore how and why this massive transformation occurred, and what larger implications this may hold for societal perceptions of artifacts. In particular, we will see that the evolution in popular opinion in the second half of the 20th century was the result of two contributing factors: the rise of the environmental movement and the economic transition away from traditional heavy industries. Together, these two forces reduced the public stature of smokestacks and made them vulnerable to the cultural vilification associated with industrial pollution. Before 1950, the manufacturing sector employed over one-third of the American workforce in jobs that often paid well above the average wage for unskilled labor. For these people, smokestacks and the factories that they supported were the keys to the stable working-class lifestyle that had eluded their agricultural forefathers. Such thoughts can be clearly seen in period artwork and advertisements, such as this 1925 advertisement by the Ford Company entitled Visions of Tomorrow. The piece depicts a working-class family looking on in awe at a landscape dominated by one of the company's manufacturing plants. The juxtaposition of the smoke-belching factory with the family's new Ford vehicle suggests the positive material aspect of industrialization and the new economic opportunities to be had from America's booming manufacturing sector. The subtitle, Opening the Highways to All Mankind, further emphasizes the material equality offered by manufacturing companies like Ford, which promise to give the majority of Americans, regardless of skill or birth, access to previously unavailable luxury goods such as automobiles. At the same time, similar ideas were being emulated across the globe in the USSR. Propaganda posters such as this one from 1921 emphasized the importance of heavy industry to the economic well-being of Soviet citizens. The poster here reads, "Smoke of chimneys is the breath of Soviet Russia," emphasizing the strength of contemporary mental associations between smokestacks and national vitality. By metaphorically comparing an inanimate smokestack to human lungs, the poster also suggests that the relative ambivalence of early modern society towards industrial pollution, which they are seemingly willing to breathe in exchange for economic progress. Such comfort also manifested itself through contemporary industrial building practices, which emphasizes the connection of smokestacks and industrial facilities with their local communities through the use of period architecture. Smokestacks seen in the ensuing slides are typical of the Victorian style, with intricate brickwork patterns and designs. Such artistic effort implies that these structures were meant to be seen and enjoyed by the public rather than avoided, and thus had become an accepted part of the urban fabric. Though it may seem strange to think of a smokestack as beautiful, numerous contemporary accounts exist of such industrial tourism, including this 1910 postcard from Madison County, Indiana. Leveraging their economic promise, smokestacks had evolved in public opinion into an institution of their own. After decades as an economic backbone, the manufacturing sector of most developed nations began to decline in relative importance throughout the second half of the 20th century. In the U.S., manufacturing as a percentage of GDP declined from 24.3% in 1970 to 12.8% in 2010, while employment fell to 9% of the total workforce. Though the causes of this decline are outside the scope of this presentation, the fact of its occurrence had a tremendous impact on culture, none the least being public perception of heavy industry. With less people working in factories, the connection between smokestacks and prosperity became less clear. This can be plainly seen in public relations to factory and smokestack demolitions. Headlines like this one from the Milwaukee Sentinel describe an atmosphere of communal celebration surrounding the event, which would have been lamented as economic catastrophe earlier in the century. The trend towards deindustrialization was even more rapid in urban centers, as remaining heavy industries fled to the suburbs in search of modern amenities and cheaper land. In Baltimore City, 82.7% of all manufacturing jobs were lost during a 35-year period from 1970 to 2005. Since urban centers had previously featured the densest collection of heavy industry, the decentralization of manufacturing meant that the general public was less and less exposed to smokestacks within their daily lives. In place of manufacturing, the service sector expanded throughout most developed nations. accounting for nearly 4/5 of American jobs by 2011. The work environment in these jobs is customer-centric and therefore cleaner and safer than that in the manufacturing industry. With the majority of Americans working in this new and radically different aesthetic environment, smokestacks can no longer attract significant public support. While deindustrialization had reduced the public stature of smokestacks, it was not until the arrival of the environmental movement that they began to be seen as threats. The topic of industrial pollution first arrived in the U.S. with the passage of the Air Pollution Control Act of 1955, which contained provisions for the monitoring of industrial air pollution. The movement then gained strength after the release of Rachel Carson's acclaimed book Silent Spring, which warned of the dangers of uncontrolled pesticide application. By 1970, sufficient public concern had built up over industrial pollutants to pass a revision to the Clean Air Act, placing strict limits on such emissions for the first time in U.S. history. Since smokestacks act as the physical distributors of industrial pollutants within manufacturing plants, and are oftentimes the only visible source of emissions, they have come to become a major symbol of environmental degradation. Evidence of this new role can once again be seen in period artwork, such as the cover of the popular global warming documentary An Inconvenient Truth, which depicts a hurricane literally spewing out of a coal-fired power plant. The dark, foreboding clouds in the background and the smoke's metaphorical shape combine to suggest the deadly effects of carbon pollution from heavy industry, and by association from the smokestacks that carry their emissions. Moreover, the smokestacks, they seem distant, separated from the audience by a dark, empty foreground. They have become disembodied sources of pollution, far removed from the concept of jobs and livelihood. As a result of these negative associations, it has become standard practice for new industrial developments to minimize the visibility of large elements such as smokestacks through landscaping and camouflage. The architectural intricacy of earlier stacks has also disappeared in favor of a more utilitarian style not meant for public consumption, marking a symbolic acceptance of their diminished social role. As a result of the preceding economic and cultural changes, smokestacks would never regain the stature they once held in the early modern era. And while this may not seem especially significant, it does challenge some commonly held assumptions. We see, for example, that although industrial artifacts like smokestacks may seem purely utilitarian, they in fact have a deep cultural significance that is strongly linked to contemporary social and economic trends. Yet, perhaps more importantly, it is clear that this cultural meaning is capable of rapid change over relatively short periods of time. With this in mind, what exactly can we expect of other important social symbols? Can any of them be thought of as truly permanent?